Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a topic today that, I gotta admit, I didn't know much about going in. All Saints' Day. One of you awesome listeners reached out wanting to know more, and, well, let's just say, getting to the bottom of this holiday was a wild ride.
Yeah, it's one of those things that seems simple on the surface, but the more you dig, the more interesting it gets.
Totally. So, to make sure we really get this right, we've got some heavy hitters with us today. The Catholic Encyclopedia, the new Catholic Encyclopedia, and the Encyclopedia of Religion.
Oh.
We're going to see what they have to say about All Saints' Day. Ready to get started?
Absolutely. Let's dive in.
Okay, so you hear All Saints' Day, and you probably think, okay, a day to honor all the saints makes sense. But it's not that simple, is it?
Nope, not at all. I mean, the Catholic Encyclopedia even calls it a feast to honor all the saints known and unknown. But that idea of honoring saints and, maybe asking them to put in a good word for you with Christ, that goes all the way back to the late 2nd century. Early Christians were already honoring martyrs back then.
So we've got the honoring of the saints going on. But then the Catholic Encyclopedia mentions this date, May 13th, 609 or 610 AD, when Pope Boniface V takes the Pantheon in Rome, that huge temple built for all the Roman gods, and rededicates it to Mary and all the Christian martyrs. It's like right then and there, you see things starting to get a little mixed up.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And it's not a coincidence either. Think about it. That date, it lines up almost perfectly with the Roman festival of Lemuria, which was all about appeasing the spirits of the dead. So you can see how the early church might have been trying to make their celebration fit in with what the Romans were already doing.
Trying to blend in a little, huh? It's like what historian Jean Marcal said. The Roman gods left their place to the saints of the triumphant religion. It really feels like a straight swap, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And this whole blending thing, it's not a one-time thing. We're going to see it pop up again and again. But before we get ahead of ourselves, we have to talk about the fact that All Saints' Day, well, it wasn't always on November 1st. Pope Gregory III moved it, and no one really knows why.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mystery. But get this, the Encyclopedia of Religion points out that England already had a celebration on November 1st, and it might have been connected to the Celtic festival of Samhain. Now that's when things start to get really interesting.
Right, you're getting it. Samhain was a big, big deal for the Celts. It marked the end of summer, the start of the darker half of the year, and get this, they believed it was a time when the veil between the world of the living and the dead was at its thinnest. Sound familiar?
Yeah, I'm starting to see some connections here. Honoring the dead, this whole veil between worlds idea, definitely some All Saints' Day vibes. The Encyclopedia of Religion even goes so far as to suggest that the church might have moved the celebration to November 1st on purpose. Like maybe they were trying to steer people away from those pagan customs. Pretty clever, right?
Totally strategic. And don't forget about the Irish monks during this time. They were super influential and had a thing for putting important feasts on the first of the month. So November 1st it is. All Saints' Day gets its date. It's all coming together, right?
It's all starting to make sense. And then, of course, in 835 AD, Pope Gregory V makes it official. All Saints' Day is now a universal celebration for the whole church. But wait, there's more. They add another layer to it with All Souls' Day on November 2nd, specifically for praying for souls in purgatory. But hold on a sec before we get into that.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Hold up a second. Before we move on, the new Catholic Encyclopedia drops this little detail. Even during medieval times, people still believed souls could show up as, get this, will-o'-the-wisps, witches, or even toads. I mean, it just goes to show, no matter how hard the church tried to make this a purely Christian holiday, those older beliefs were sticking around.
Like, they tried to put a fresh coat of paint on it, but the original is still peeking through underneath. So what we're seeing here is All Saints' Day, even though it's presented as this totally Christian thing, it actually goes way, way back with roots in pre-Christian traditions and beliefs. It's a real mix.
Yeah, total blend. And it makes you think how much of what we call tradition is really just a mix of different cultures and beliefs all mashed up together over time.
Okay, so we've got this awesome foundation for the history of All Saints' Day. But I think it's time to shift gears a bit and talk about what all this means in the here and now. Ready to dive into the modern-day significance of this holiday?
Absolutely. Let's get into it. So we've gone deep on the history of All Saints' Day. And wow, it's definitely not as straightforward as it seems. But the big question is, how does all this play out today?
Yeah, like, we know the backstory, but what does All Saints' Day actually mean for people now?
Well, for a lot of Christians, it's still a time to remember and honor all the saints, both the ones we know and the ones we don't. It's a way to connect with the history of the church, the legacy of all those who came before.
So it's still super tied to those core Christian beliefs.
Oh, definitely. But even for people who aren't super religious, All Saints' Day can still have meaning. It can be a time for reflection, remembering loved ones who've passed away.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like it taps into that universal human experience of dealing with loss and wanting to remember those we've lost.
Exactly. And you see that connection to remembering the dead in a lot of the cultural practices that go along with All Saints' Day, especially in places where those older Celtic traditions are still strong.
Like, what kind of traditions are we talking about?
Well, in some cultures, people visit cemeteries, decorate graves, light candles in memory of their loved ones. It's a way to honor their memory, keep them present in their lives.
It sounds kind of similar to what people do on Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, in Mexico.
You know, you're right. There are some definite parallels there. Both holidays are all about remembering and celebrating those who've died, even though they come from different places and have different religious contexts.
Okay, so we've got the religious side of All Saints' Day, and then we've got these cultural traditions that have sprung up around it over time. It's almost like it's this multi-layered holiday, different meanings for different people.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And you can't forget about the commercialization of All Saints' Day, too. With Halloween right before it, you see a lot of overlap in the decorations and costumes and all that.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
It's like Halloween has almost become a part of All Saints' Day, even though technically they're different holidays.
Right. It's so fascinating to see how these different traditions have all gotten mixed up over time. It's a good reminder that culture's always changing, always adapting.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from the ancient roots of All Saints' Day all the way to its modern-day meaning and how it's celebrated around the world.
It's been quite a journey. But before we wrap up, I think there's one more question we need to tackle. We've talked about the history, the traditions, how it's all evolved, but what does it all really mean? Like, what's the big takeaway?
That's a good question. After all this digging, what's the nugget of wisdom we're left with?
For me, it's realizing that traditions, even ones that seem so deeply rooted in a certain religion or culture, they're always being shaped and reshaped by the people who practice them. They're not set in stone, they're fluid.
That's a really interesting point. It's like, yeah, we can trace the roots of All Saints' Day back centuries, but it's still changing today as people find new meaning in it, connect it to their own lives and experiences.
Exactly. And that's what makes traditions so fascinating, right? They reflect who we are, where we come from, and what we value.
Beautifully said. I feel like we've really gone deep on this one. We've explored the history, the cultural significance, even the philosophical side of All Saints' Day.
I think our listener out there has got to be feeling pretty well informed by now. But before we say goodbye, I want to throw out one more thought.
Go for it. I'm all ears.
All this talk about how traditions get mixed together, how beliefs evolve, how people connect with this holiday in different ways, it makes me wonder, what other celebrations, ones that seem totally straightforward, what other ones might have origins that are just as complex and surprising?
Yeah, that's a great question. Makes you think, doesn't it?
It really does.
I feel like we could do a whole series just on that. But before we get too carried away, let's bring it back to our listener. After learning all this, how does it change how you see All Saints' Day? Do you see it in a new light?
I think it really shows us that traditions, they're always changing, always evolving. And it makes us want to be more curious, question what we think we know, keep exploring.
I couldn't have said it better myself. So to our listener out there, we hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of All Saints' Day. It's a lot more complex than it seems on the surface, right?
For sure.
If you enjoyed this, be sure to hit that subscribe button. We've got a whole bunch of other deep dives waiting for you, and we're always adding more.
Always more to explore.
That's right. Thanks for coming along on this journey with us.
Until next time, keep those questions coming and keep digging deeper. You never know what you might find.